Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to wrap up the day with our last presentation. Next, we have Rich Meesters, who's going to be presenting, designing, and deploying Citrix Workspace in Google Cloud. But before we get to Rich, we're going to start off with two more trivia questions. So I'm sure you're already aware of how the trivia works, but I'm just going to reiterate it for some of those who have joined our event late. First of all, use the chat in the bottom corner to record your answers. And if the first one who answers correctly in the chat will receive a $10 Amazon gift certificate. In addition, if you cannot find the chat widget, please go ahead and open it now so you're ready to respond. Okay, here we go. So the first question today is, what is the largest island in Canada? Okay, starting to see some responses come in. Oh, I believe we have a winner. Yes, the correct answer is Baffin Island. So the first person who responded is LL. LL, please reach out to Jennifer Gibbons to receive your prize. We will be reaching out very shortly to our next question. I hope everyone is ready. All right, here we go. What is the world's largest freshwater island? Oh, we have a winner. Great job, Mike G, who correctly answered with Manitoulin Island. Great job. All right, congratulations, LL and Mike G, for winning today's trivia. So, as you're aware, Stratodesk helped us with or rather sponsored this event. So I'm going to play a quick video for everyone. And then we're going to go right into Rich's presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Severson. I'm one of the sales directors here with Stratodesk for the Americas region. And today we're going to discuss how Stratodesk mobilizes work from home. For those of you who don't know, Stratodesk is a visionary company behind the next generation software solution, No Touch. A blend of hyper-powerful endpoint management and Linux-based operating system, Stratodesk is redefining endpoint computing by delivering a cutting-edge endpoint management platform for VDI, desktop as a service, and IoT markets. Remote work, business continuity, and secure access to apps, data, and desktops from anywhere have become a top priority for organizations worldwide. Stratodesk delivers everything you need to enable your mobile workforce. No Touch OS and No Touch Center together are the #1 solution for deploying, managing, and monitoring thousands of on-premise and remote endpoints. How we enable work from home, or remote work in general, is with our No Touch OS, which is a Linux-based operating system for x86 or ARM architecture, specifically the Raspberry Pis. With that, we've added a new solution this year, which is our No Touch Goes. This is a bootable USB stick that comes preloaded with our OS on it and licensing included. No Touch Center is a centralized endpoint management platform which is a lightweight OVA that can be deployed on a virtual machine, on-prem, or likewise can be deployed natively in the cloud with AWS or Azure. Likewise, we've included a new feature this year, which is our cloud extension, which is a simplified way of securely managing remote endpoints. The graphic here provides an overview of how you can deploy our no-touch solution, where No-Touch Center can be deployed in the cloud with AWS or Azure. Again, we can host this for you, or you can host this within your cloud instance. Additionally, the OVA can be quickly stood up on-prem. With our cloud extension, you can easily provision and manage work from anywhere users while reducing vulnerability risks from opening a bunch of ports in your firewall. We offer unbeatable flexibility with the widest range of hardware and software support, managing both x86 and ARM architecture within a single pane of glass, solutions for both 32-bit and 64-bit environments. Our No-Touch Center, again, can be deployed natively to the cloud. We have our cloud extension for simplified and secure remote management, flexible licensing and buying options, including both the No-Touch OS and No-Touch Center, along with a hands-off deployable methodology with the No-Touch Center, where you can deploy the no-touch solution in minutes. We are hardware agnostic, supporting anything from x86, x64, 32-bit, 64-bit, and the ARM architecture with Raspberry Pi. Our hardware partners do include HP for the EMEA regions. You can get a select number of hardware offerings that they have, which comes with the No-Touch OS preloaded. We have partnerships with LG for their all-in-one solutions, NVIDIA for the Jetson Nanos, and NComputing and ClearCube for x86 and Raspberry Pi offerings. Here's an overview of our Stratodesk ecosystem for a list of partners that we work with, including but not limited to Imprivata, Paradigm, partnerships for hardware like NComputing, ClearCube, LG, ongoing and growing relationships with Liquidware and Lakeside, ThinPrint for print management, and most importantly, we have a new relationship with Avaya to help provide a better end-user experience for call center deployments. So with that, guys, we'd like to strongly encourage you to visit our website, stratodesk.com/demo, where you can sign up and fill out a quick form. This will allow you 2 all-access licenses to be able to test every aspect of the deployment that you may have to meet your use case. We look forward to meeting with you guys and hopefully partnering soon. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Citrix, for having us. We're excited to be here, and we're excited to meet you. Have a good one.
Thank you very much, Nick from Stratodesk. So on to our next presenter. So now I would like to introduce you to Rich Meesters, Senior Enterprise Architect with Citrix. He's going to share with us how to design and deploy Citrix Workspace in Google Cloud. Over to you, Rich. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it. Let me just turn my camera on here. We'll get moving. Oh, as Derek said, my name is Rich Meesters. I am a senior enterprise architect in Citrix in Canada here. I'm also the customer success architect for Canada. So basically, I provide the how and I assist our sales teams and our delivery teams in understanding how to use the technology and deploy it. I've been in IT for about 34 years, a little more than that, and the last 10 years of that, a little more than 10 years of that as well at Citrix in various roles. I'm married for almost as long as I've been in IT, and I have 2 kids. And a little bit just about me, I'm an avid cyclist. I've done a couple of tours across Canada, raising funds for childhood cancer research. And in my little bit of off time that I have when I'm not on the bicycle or working, I spend a lot of time mentoring a FIRST robotics team as a programming mentor. So getting into the topic at hand, what I wanted to do today is go over a little bit of an overview about the Citrix and Google relationship, and then delve into the reference architectures. What does it look like? What are the design patterns? Talk a little bit about the specific features and functions of Citrix on Google Cloud and some of the things that we can do here. A little bit about prerequisites. So if you're designing and deploying an environment, what do you need to consider from a sizing perspective, from a components that are required perspective. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about a project that's out on GitHub that'll allow you to deploy proofs of concept a little bit faster. So let's jump right in. So we'll talk at first again here a little bit about the partnership between Google and Citrix. It's been about a 10-year relationship as well with Citrix and Google. We started in 2011. The primary focus back then was on how could we deploy virtual apps and desktops to Chromebooks. And over time, between 2011 and present, I know this slide stops at 2020, but I'm sure there's more stuff that's going to be coming in 2021. We've really accelerated that through integration with Citrix files, or the old term share file, with integration with Google Drive and Gmail, through really getting into that development phase of deploying Citrix virtual apps and desktops on Google Cloud, and then a lot of acceleration in terms of some of the features that we'll talk about a little bit later as we've moved on towards today. As an overview, what this looks like is really there's kind of three main areas that we talk about when we talk about the Citrix and Google relationship. The first being obviously at the endpoint, and that's integrating the Citrix Workspace app with Chromebooks, with Android devices, integration into the Chrome browser, etc. All of that uses, Workspace and secure Workspace access to enter into and deploy the Citrix Workspace product, which again through SWA integrates with some of the Google ecosystem and things like Google Workspace and all of the components that entails. And then the third leg of the stool here is really integration of the Citrix virtual apps and desktops platform with the Google Cloud platform, which is what we're going to spend most of our time focused on today. And really that's both the traditional CVADs or Citrix virtual apps and desktops product, as well as the networking products, or Citrix Adcs, and how they integrate as well into Google Cloud Platform. So let's focus a little bit on the Citrix and Google Cloud components. What does it look like? We're going to take a look at the architecture patterns that we have for Citrix virtual apps and desktops on Google Cloud. The first pattern is what we call the cloud forward design pattern. And if you think about it, really, this is the all-in pattern where we're deploying a complete cloud service for our end users. So we're using the Citrix Google Cloud Platform as a resource location in various customer locations. We're using the Citrix Cloud Services rather than deploying anything unnecessary into the cloud. So we're taking advantage of Citrix Analytics, the Citrix Workspace for access, Citrix Gateway Service for HDX proxy outbound to the end users, and the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service to perform the brokering function, enabling us to access the VDAs that we have in our customer Google Cloud Platform resource location. So when you think about this, this is really kind of going to deploy the minimal set of components within Google Cloud. It's really going to be connectors, workloads, and potentially Active Directory. And it's a great platform for things like proofs of concept, pure cloud deployments where a customer is going to deploy only in the cloud, or for testing as well. So this is kind of the base design pattern that you'll see. It will, potentially use some on-premises resources for things like Active Directory and access to customer files and back-end components that the applications may use. But primarily, everything is going to be on-prem. The next pattern really starts to expand a little bit upon the cloud forward pattern, and we start to talk about hybrid design, where we start to bring some elements that we might have normally put on premise into our Google Cloud Platform resource locations. And here, really what we're focusing on is the access tier components. So this pattern is quite often used when a customer wants to leverage everything in the cloud, but they want to control how users are accessing the environment. So they want to have strict control over the logon path. They want to have strict control over the HDX path outbound from the environment. So what the pattern adds here is the Citrix ADC gateway component, so Adcdpxs in Google Cloud, as well as optionally these storefront components. And this is going to, as we said, add the flexibility to provide more capabilities on routing and control of the access tier. But conversely, it's also going to add some cost into the customer's resource location because you're going to have these additional components that you're going to have to install and manage yourself, and of course pay for the consumption on the cloud and the cloud resource usage model. So with this pattern, really the question is, why are we choosing to deploy, Adcdpxs versus using the gateway service? And I want to go over a little bit of the pros and cons of each to kind of understand the rationale between the decision-making process that individual customers might make. The gateway service, which is included with both Citrix Workspace and Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop service, is a native cloud service. So that makes it simple, it makes it easy to set up. There's no components that have to be added. It's there to be used. Very minor configurations that need to be done in order to make it work. And it leverages points of presence around the world. And currently we have about 24 locations that are managed as points of presence around the world. Where the users will access the environment, and then it's going to use corporate cloud backbones to route the traffic back to the customer's resource location. As such, it's a great option for customers who have geographically distributed workforces because they can be programmed to set up and access the point of presence that's closest to them. Conversely, one thing to note is that the gateway service is only an HDX proxy gateway, so it doesn't perform any of the other features of a Citrix ADC. So you're not getting load balancing, you're not getting web app firewall or any other type of application that you might be running traditionally on an ADC today. And the routing might or might not be optimal for your customer situation or for your individual situation, in that if your users are centralized in a single location and they're relatively close to the cloud data center that you're going to be using, they may end up routing to a point of presence which is not close to the data center, which is going to add network hops. It's going to increase latency. So it's really something that you want to take into consideration when you take a look at where your users are located and how they need to access the environment. Deploying ADCs, as we said, I mean, that's really getting into the full features of a Citrix Adcdpx appliance in the cloud resource location. So not only is it going to allow you to have more fine-grained control over the routing, where you can actually direct user groups specifically to the data center that you're working from, but also it's opening up some of the advanced networking features of the ADC for you for other use cases. So if you're doing web applications and the background in your Google resource locations, then you can start to take advantage of some of the additional ADC features that are there, like web application firewall, application load balancing, SSL offload, etc. It also does allow you to use some advanced authentication options. We'll talk a little bit more about Workspace next, but If there are authentication options that you want to use or are already using within your organization, they may or may not be available to you through Workspace. So the ADC can then be used as what we call ADC as IDP in the cloud environments and allow you to use those authentication options that are native to the ADC. In terms of Workspace versus Storefront, again, if you use Workspace, it's a simple cloud-based service. It's there. It's provided as part of the subscription with Citrix Cloud. Doesn't require a lot of configuration. There's no servers to manage. It does give you options to customize the environment for your business's use case, but it is basically a simple cloud-based service. The other thing is, if you're familiar with the Citrix Workspace app, the new features that are brought to the interface, things like SaaS and web applications, Citrix Files integration, the use of micro apps are all fundamentally based on using the Workspace. It also provides some built-in simple OTP integration for multi-factor authentication. Also, you can build into some of the more popular external providers like Azure AD and Okta. So those components are there natively. You don't necessarily have to build in ADCs to use that. The negatives really are that it is a cloud-based service. So we have run into some customer situations where they won't allow their users outbound access to the cloud for authentication, and therefore you have to start to consider using a more traditional approach of using the ADCs in Storefront to create the authentication platform. It's also cloud-based, so availability it goes with internet access. So if you have your access to your internet is down, that will create some issues. Although we do have recent additions like Citrix Workspace Resiliency that can be deployed to provide high availability at the endpoint. For Storefront, on the other hand, that is a known interface, right? A lot of the organizations that are in Citrix, most of them today, are using Storefront. So it's a known interface. Everybody kind of knows what to expect, both from a supportability perspective as well as the end user's visibility of the environment. It does support local host cache natively with Citrix Cloud, so your CVAD's deployment can use local host cache. In this case, it's hosted on the connectors that are in the resource locations, and you can use that as a method to provide high availability should some of the services go down. The other side of this is if you are wanting to or have a use case where you currently need multiple store configurations, then for various use cases, then you're really looking at this as an option to provide support for those multiple store configurations. Again, on the negatives, like ADCs in a cloud resource location, you are, of course, looking at creating those instances yourself, managing them, managing the version of Storefront on those instances, and doing all of the maintenance and update from the OS up that would imply. Again, here as well, just to go back to what you have in Workspace, you are then limited as well to the traditional virtual apps and desktops deployment. You're not going to see the SaaS and web apps. You're not going to see the Citrix Files integration or have any access to micro apps and those features and functions that are part of Workspace. The last pattern that we'll talk about is the cloud migration design pattern. This is the one where I would expect most customers are going to live, at least in the short to midterm. And to me, it's not really well defined or named as being the cloud migration pattern, because it is really more of that full hybrid pattern where we're actually starting to look at not only the access tier, but also a hybrid approach to delivering the virtual apps and desktops. And this is probably the reality for most customers as they start their cloud migration journey. There's not a lot of folks that I talk to that are ready to jump headlong into cloud and abandon a data center or have a completely cloud use case, although there are a few out there. The pattern adds to and builds on the hybrid pattern, and really here what we start talking about is starting to move and have multiple resource locations where we have some in cloud and we have some in the traditional on-premises data center. And in this case, it gives us the flexibility really at the workload level to talk about deploying the workloads logically close to the back-end resources to optimize performance. And then as we move back-ends into a cloud solution, to be able to migrate those workloads over to the Google Cloud Platform and to be able to provide access to those applications and get the performance that we expect out of them. Finally, I'll touch briefly here in the architecture section on deploying ADCs in Google Cloud. We do, of course, support deploying Adcdpxs in Google Cloud, and they can be deployed either as standalone instances or in HA pairs, which is really what we see here on the screen. For HA pairs, we typically want to see 3 NICs deployed, and so we'll deploy 3 network interfaces within our Google Cloud instances, and those are going to be to support management traffic, front-end traffic via a VIP, and the back-end traffic via the SNP. This HA deployment that we see here, and it's actually similar to what we've seen in the other slides, is going to be supported across multiple Google Cloud Platform zones. And we want to deploy a pair across the zones to prevent a failure in one zone from impacting operations. When we do deploy across multiple zones, like as this HA configuration shows, we really have 2 choices here. We either have to configure the ADCs in INC, or Independent Network Configuration mode, or we have to deploy a cloud load balancer in front of the HA configuration. And this is because the VIPs addresses are public IPs, and they're not going to transition over between the 2 zones when you are, if you have an HA failover in the environment. So let's switch gears here a bit and talk about what's new. We've reviewed the high-level architecture options, so let's look at some of the kind of features and requirements that are somewhat unique to Google Cloud itself when we're talking about deploying a CVADS deployment. So first off, let's talk about MCS and how that relates to Google Cloud. When we developed MCS for deployment on Google Cloud, one of the fundamental changes that we made was the ability to use an instance template that is provided in Google when you create your instances as part of the master VM configuration. And this is, as far as I understand to date, still a unique feature for MCS on Google Cloud. It does allow us more flexibility in deploying these machine creation services-based workloads, particularly when it comes to new features that might get added to the virtual machine instances in Google Cloud. It's going to allow us more flexibility to deploy those updates and things that are applied to templates without having to go back and recode any of the MCS infrastructure. The template-based deployment really allows us to add features such as labels and tags, CPU and GPU configurations, firewall settings, and other service account-related properties by changing the template and then redeploying the image. So we don't have to go into the master image at all. We don't have to rebuild the master image. We can change the template itself, and then we can redeploy the image via MCS. One example of this, and we'll touch on it a bit more as well on the next slide, is a setting called min node CPU, which is a fairly new value, which is set for using sole tenant nodes in Google Cloud. And that allows us to create or to set up and use CPU overcommit when we're deploying virtual machines in sole tenant nodes. We're also continuously improving the environment. So over time, we roll out new features and functions within Google Cloud in our cloud updates. The two most recent ones that I'm aware of, which are just coming out now, are really around being able to improve the scale of MCS deployed VDAs in a Google Cloud project, so increasing the number of machines that we support, as well as some performance improvements that are being made to improve the speed of machine startup when the machines have been created and are running in catalogs and delivery groups. Speaking of sole tenant nodes, this is something that's really fundamental to deploying Windows 10 in Google Cloud. So as you may know, Microsoft has some EULA-based limitations on how you can deploy Windows 10 in public cloud environments. And if it's a non-Microsoft public cloud environment, then you're required to deploy your VMs on machines that are, or on nodes that are not shared by any other customer. In order to accomplish this in Google Cloud, what we do is we use sole tenant nodes. And sole tenant nodes are physical compute engine servers that are dedicated to a customer within that organization's project. These can then be carved up into multiple nodes, really much like a typical hypervisor server in an on-prem environment. So this will support the Microsoft licensing requirements for deploying Windows 10 machines in Google Cloud. It can also be used for bring your own license strategies. So if you have server licensing and you want to deploy without having to carry the additional cost of the licenses that are inherent in an instance type, you can use sole tenant nodes for that. But it's not strictly required for delivering server-hosted apps and desktops. In terms of with Citrix, when deploying STNs for virtual apps and desktops, machines are deployed across node groups, which are defined when you create the sole tenant nodes. And then we have some labels that we have to attach to the machines prior to machine creation. We talked about the min node CPU one, which handles the ability to go beyond the processor limits there and create more vCPUs than you have processors. The other big one is node affinity labels, which are used by MCS to define the location for machine creation. And they're really critical to successfully deploying these sole tenant nodes. So you need to make sure that when you're deploying these in your master catalog, that you set the node affinity label and the min node CPU in the template before deploying the master image. It's also important to note that during the MCS process, you'll see a screen that will allow you to select zones. And you want to make sure that when that happens, you're only selecting the zones that contain the node groups that have been created for sole tenant nodes. Shared VPC is another unique solution in Google Cloud, and it really allows an organization to connect resources from multiple projects to a centrally managed virtual private cloud network or VPC network, so that they can communicate with each other securely and efficiently using the internal IPs on that shared network. It really allows for the network access across multiple projects to be flattened and to be managed by a centralized networking team. When deploying shared VPCs, a host project owns the VPC, so that's defined by that host project, and then it can be used by other service projects that are designated within the environment. In order to take advantage of the shared VPC networks with CVADS deployments, a couple of things really to consider here. One is that there are some additional service account roles that need to be configured. We'll talk about that in the next section of the presentation. And cloud connectors may need to be homed in both shared and local VPCs because you may need access to resources such as Active Directory and your VDAs that might be in the shared VPC, that you might also have some other in-project resources such as Bastion hosts that would be on local VPCs. So you would need to then multi-home your cloud connectors to make sure that you can access both. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about Google Managed Services for Active Directory, which is a services-based alternative for delivering Active Directory domain services in Google Cloud. So with this, you can provide domain services without having to build and maintain those Active Directory instances. So again, here, using a service allows us to minimize the amount of infrastructure as a service that we have to build within the project, with the advantage being reducing the overall instance costs versus that dedicated in-cloud AD infrastructure. That being said, there are some restrictions here or some limitations that you want to consider if you're looking at using the managed service versus deploying your own Active Directory domain controllers. The big ones here is there's no domain admin access. So if you're expecting that, you're out of luck, I guess, in that perspective. You will be using a delegated administration structure. You also don't have the ability to write to the default OUs, so you have to architect your catalogs to be using OUs that you have defined within your managed service. And really one of the bigger ones for us, if we start to consider federated authentication service within the environment, is there is no Microsoft Pki integration with the service. So if you're deploying a FAS-based solution for single sign-on, you will have to deploy a traditional on-prem Active Directory. So how do I get there? What are some of the prerequisites that you would have in terms of deploying a Citrix Cloud, a CDAD solution on Google Cloud Platform? It probably goes without saying, but the basics you need to get started with here and the fundamental building blocks are the two subscriptions, one from Citrix and one from Google. From a Citrix perspective, you're going to have the Virtual Apps and Desktops service subscription or a Workspace Premium subscription. And then on the Google side, you need to have a Google Cloud account and project to be hosting the environment. The project itself, and you can have multiple projects, provides the customer resource locations for Citrix deployment. And that's where you're going to have your workload-based instances, networking and storage related to access to those infrastructure, and some method of ingress or egress out to the network. Typically, we'll see here again designs using multiple Google Cloud zones within the project to provide higher availability. In terms of the minimal set of components that are required within the project, it's really Citrix Cloud connectors and workload servers, or the VDAs. Although Active Directory services are not strictly required to be in a cloud resource location, really for performance considerations, you want to make sure that the AD infrastructure is deployed in cloud so that you don't have any user experience delays related to VDA registration or login traffic that might be impacted by network bandwidth or latency back to the customer data center, or even potentially outages back to the customer data center. Connectors themselves are periodically and automatically updated by Citrix. And so in order to make sure that you have service in a production environment, we want to make sure that there's at least 2 connectors per resource location. Citrix's cloud deployment will update the connectors automatically, but will never update more than 1 connector in any given resource location at a single time. The connectors are really sized similar to delivery controllers. Particularly if you're going to use a storefront option, it'll be the local host cache. So we size them pretty much the same way we'd size delivery controllers. 4B CPUs, 8 to 16 gigs of RAM. And so that really kind of falls into that N2 standard 4 instance type in Google, which is a 4B CPU, 16 gigabyte RAM VM. You want to have storage sized appropriately for handling the OS, the connector software, which isn't very heavy in terms of its requirements, as well as any potential security products that your organization might require within the environment. VDAs themselves, well, they're sized much the same way you would size them on-prem, which is size them based on workload requirements. There are some great articles on sizing them for for optimal cost consumption. So how many users can we get on a machine? And that has been published, and you'll see when we talk at the end of the presentation about some of the links that's available. And also, it's something that that is a work in progress too. Over time, we continually try to update that information. Additional components that you might put in within the customer project include the aforementioned Adcdpxs and storefront servers. If you're going to deploy for single sign-on with a SAML-based authentication, then you're going to want to look at federated authentication servers and certificate services. And of course, for user profiles where applied, you're either going to have profile servers or profile shares of some sort to manage depending upon the profile solution that you put in place. In order to deploy workloads into Google Cloud via MCS or to power manage existing workloads via Citrix Studio, then you really do need to put a hosting connection into Citrix Studio with a service account that is capable of managing the Google Cloud APIs. The information that you see on the slide here represents the base API and service account roles that are required to deploy the workloads by MCS and subsequently power managed machines. One thing to note here is when we talk about the service account permissions here, they're really for a full project scope. In other words, you're providing the service account access to read, write, create, delete components across the entire project. There are ways to do a narrow scope. What we generally recommend is if you're going to be deploying a Citrix infrastructure, dedicate a project to it, and that way you don't have to worry about making fine-tuning adjustments to the service account and potentially creating more administrative overhead and issues that might occur by narrowing the scope too deep. The other thing you'll see here, the cloud build account, it has the additional roles that have to be applied. In some cases, they're by default in the project, but they're good to check to make sure that they are there for the cloud build account, since we use the cloud build account with MCS to actually deploy the machines. And if you're doing a shared VPC, there are some additional service account permissions required here. You need the compute firewalls and networks list, and then the subnet roles here are optional, really dependent upon how the networking team has architected the shared VPC as to whether it requires project or subnet level permissions. In terms of deploying Citrix ADCs, there's also a set of roles that need to be applied to a service account in order to provision and manage ADCs in Google Cloud. If you're using the same service account for both your CVADs deployment as well as your ADC deployments, then these will probably be contained within the compute admin accounts that you deploy, but it's a good thing to check and make sure that these roles are set. As we talked about previously as well, each ADC is going to require 3 NICs, and those NICs should be in their own VPCs to provide network separation of traffic. So you want, obviously your management network to be in its own VPC, and then both your front end and back end traffic to be in separate VPCs so that you're not in a position where the ADC could be bypassed or traffic gets around it. For ADCHA itself as well, the one thing you want to ensure is that the Cloud Resource Manager API is enabled and has full access to all of the cloud APIs so that it can handle the HA configuration changes. So finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we get there fast. So setting all of this up yourself is something that can be done. It's obviously a great learning experience to go through and set up all the components. But if you want to set up a proof of concept environment fast, there is an option that we've been working on developing for some time. And that is if you go on GitHub and find the Citrix on GCP GitHub project. This has been around for a few years. There have been some modifications made to it, and I recently found out that there are some gotchas here now, and you may or may not be able to successfully deploy with it. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I did include it. And it is also something that the Citrix and Google team are working on updating and making sure that it's really rock solid for your environment. The intent of this, and it's been used in the past to basically quickly deploy a proof of concept environment. And this will set up all of the components required without any manual input beyond what is requested via the script. The base requirement for this is a Google Cloud project and a CVAD subscription. It can be done with trial subscriptions, but I understand also that recently Google Cloud has changed so that they don't have Windows-based VMs in their trial. So if you obviously to deploy the Windows machines in this, you'll need a full Google Cloud subscription. By cloning the repository and running the deployment script, a complete environment is configured, including cloud connectors, workloads, and Active Directory instances. Connectors are configured into the CVAD's tenant, and testing applications are published. It also creates a set of Active Directory accounts for both administrative and test users. And this is a completely separate Active Directory from the customer or from your organization's corporate AD. So it's really only meant for proof of concept. And once you've done that, once you're complete, you can get rid of it. The environment can also be resized. So it initially creates a single VDA, and there is a script to add additional workers. That will then create the machines, start them, join them to the domain, do any bootstrapping configuration, and it will register them into the existing machine catalog and delivery group that are created for the proof of concept. It will not create more applications, but you can simply go into Studio and publish more applications. I believe the scripts only today will set up Notepad for testing, but of course you can go in via Studio and add any applications you want that might be on the environment. Once the proof of concept is completed, then you can also use a script in here to clean things up. So the advantage here is obviously getting rid of resources in cloud that you might be paying for. Once the POC is done, you want to clean them up. So this script will allow you to quickly clean up the environment. Finally, really here, a great repository for information and where our reference architectures are and things like that is Citrix Tech Zone. So it's a repository for technical insights and information from the people who work with the products at Citrix. It includes resources such as diagrams, proof of concept guides, reference architectures, and other technical topics, really across the entire range of Citrix products. So I'd encourage you to take a look. For the Citrix on Google Cloud, these three are really some of the key articles that you might want to take a look at. The reference architecture contains a lot of the information that we went over in the presentation with the diagrams, some additional detail. And then the two below have information both on sole tenant and on shared VPC configurations. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attendance, and I will open it up to questions.
Hi, Rich. It's Derek. I have a question. Do you see Google Cloud adoption going higher and higher, growing more and more as each year goes by, or do you find that it's still in its infancy stage?
We are seeing it grow. It is, relatively speaking, if you tend to take a look at, the three major cloud providers, although AWS was first, Azure is probably the most prominent today. And then, Google Cloud is, we're actually seeing more and more customers become interested in it. So we're definitely seeing growth there, but it's not quite as big as the other two yet. In terms of Citrix, obviously, we're talking about here.
Great. Thank you. I have another question for you, and that is with reference to why they're adopting Google Cloud. Is it because they already have an existing Google Cloud platform, or is it cost-driven? What would be some of the reasons?
Well, it's a great question. It's something that I think it really depends on the customer. We see some very large customers looking for essentially what we used to call, with phones, carrier diversity in their public clouds. So they want to have more than one public cloud infrastructure available to them in the event of, some sort of a DR requirement. I won't talk to the costs of it. I think that's something that really would come to the Google or, talking to the Google sales team or, the other cloud provider sales teams to kind of determine what's best for your organization. Everybody has their own benefits. I think that there are some technical benefits to Google Cloud with the MCS deployment, with shared VPC, allowing you to set up networking across multiple environments. But then there are also, obviously technical benefits for other public cloud providers. So you really need to match that up to what is best for your organization.
That's great. Thank you. All right. If there are no further questions, in that case, Rich, thank you very much for presenting a very interesting topic. We appreciate your time. Everyone, I'd like to direct you to the next topic, which is our roundtables topic. If you have any questions for Rich or you want to hear more, be sure to join the roundtable, which is up next. You can choose Rich's roundtable on the workspace deployment in Citrix Cloud, or choose security in the cloud or zero trust security. So you have a couple of options available to you. You can join the conversation or just sit back and listen. It's all up to you. Completely flexible. We look forward to seeing you there. And then afterwards, head over to the CUGC lobby or click on the roundtable box below, so on your main lobby page, and choose the roundtable you'd like to join. Also, be sure to come back to the lobby at approximately 3:45 Central Time for the prizes session. So I will see you very shortly. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.